Good morning and welcome to our annual conference. Today's events, our conference today and our reception this evening, mark the beginning of a year of celebrating 140 years of the Girls' Day School Trust. It was in June 1872 that those four redoubtable Victorian women decided that there had to be schools for girls, and 140 years later, here we are surviving and thriving. We're we're producing a little booklet of the history of GDST, which you'll all be given a copy of tonight. And one of the things when I was reading the copy before it was printed that really shocked and surprised me, I knew that in 1872 things were really not very good for women. It was impossible to get a divorce, they had no power of their own money once they got married. But I hadn't realised how long that disadvantage for women went on, and it wasn't, I think in 1973, which was a year after 2 years after I'd started working, if you were in the Foreign Office and you got married, you had to resign. And that really isn't that long ago. So things have changed a lot, even in the last few decades, for girls and young women. And obviously one of the things we have to think about is how we as educators actually prepare our girls for a world which will continue to change rapidly over the next few decades. It's very clear that we're in an era of exponential change, technological, environmental, social, economic. And the other thing that's very clear is that our girls are not going to retire at 60 or even 65. They're very likely to be working till 70, and they're very likely to be working. 50% of mothers of children under 5 work outside the home, 75% of mothers of all children work outside the home. So our girls have to be prepared for a workplace, and they have to be prepared to work probably for 5 decades. And it's very clear that if you work for 5 decades, you're very, very unlikely to be doing the same job all the way through, or even working in the same kind of organisation. Girls are going to have to be prepared to switch careers, not to be monogamous in their career devotion, but have a career that is more polygamous. And I think when that happens, you have to be more resilient. You have to be prepared for setbacks. When you move from one industry or one organisation to another, it won't always be a smooth ride. And that is, of course, one of the things we talk about a great deal with our girls, is building that sense of resilience. I think also they're going to have to be prepared to continue to educate and re-educate themselves. And I think we're entering an era where the first degree alone is not going to be enough. And I know with my 4 daughters, all 4 of them now have a second degree or second qualification. One of them actually is about to embark on her 4th. And I think that's going to be much more common as people invent and reinvent themselves as they go through re-energising their careers. So knowing all that, what are the implications for what we should be doing for our pupils today, and how do we make sure that the fundamentals of a good education don't get lost in a pursuit of fads and fashions and a quest for novelty and innovation? And rather than having a sort of perpetual Maoist revolution in education, what needs to stay the same? What needs to be a constant in our schools? And I think if we're thinking that education is going to be lifelong, it's not just going to be linked to those childhood years, then one of the things our schools have to do is develop attitudes to learning, and that's going to be just as important as developing knowledge, learning how to learn, developing a real physical and mental discipline, being open and engaged with the world, cultivating a true love of learning. These are going to matter just as much as learning facts and formulae and figures. And so I think that's why the theme of making space for learning is so relevant to girls today, because they're going to need to make that space for learning all through their lives. And our first speaker today, Erica McWilliam, has said before that learning matters more than knowing, and I'm sure she will be expanding on that in her talk. Of course, our schools are terrifically good at supporting girls to excel at exams and achieving strings of A stars and A's, and getting great results. But if that's all we do in our schools, then we're really failing them, because teaching to the test just isn't good enough. And so what delights and excites me is seeing how in so many of our schools we're encouraging really what I would call deep learning. And it shows in, for instance, the huge increase in the last 2 years in the take-up of the extended project qualification. This is something girls do in the sixth form, where they pursue and research a project of passionate interest to them. And for example, I was at Bromley and saw a presentation by a future dentist on whether or not amalgam fillings poison you. And she'd done a huge amount of research and she did an absolutely brilliant presentation. And they can do anything they want, but it's not on syllabus, it's not on the exam. And I think it's a wonderful thing that so many of our sixth formers are doing that. A number of our schools have sixth formers taking the Open University YAS modules, which again, very stimulating and totally off syllabus. Hulls and Nottingham both do that. So I think what these shows, it's not just what you learn, it's not that this girl's amalgam fillings are necessarily going to be really important to her in her future, but it's about how you learn. It's about pursuing your own path and really deeply researching and having your own ideas about things. And I have to say, it's also why I'm delighted whenever I see any rumours at all that AS levels might end, because to me, that first year of the sixth form is the most wonderful opportunity for intellectual exploration and excitement, and it seems to me to have been absolutely ruined by modules and a terminal public exam. Second thing is, having worked in publishing for almost 40 years and seen at first hand how digital technology can really revolutionise an industry, I'm not going to stand on the shore like King Canute and command the tide to turn, but I do really worry that the ease with which children today can access information on the internet means that our appetites are at risk of becoming infantilised. We're so used to fast facts that we don't have that idea that maybe a lot of knowledge and facts have to be put into a sort of slow stew or casserole and cooked up before we really have the best ideas. So I'm a great believer in the importance for our students, and this is so hard because I've got 6 grandchildren and they spend their entire time on their parents' iPhones and iPads, but switching off the computer, the radio, the iPhone, the TV and all the other distractions and reading, sounds very radical, a whole book. I would say from cover to cover, but I'm not really bothered whether it's an e-book or a paper book. But I think it's so important that children can read from start to finish, and they can follow an author's train of thought, and maybe through some very complicated arguments or situations through to the conclusion. Because what's different about reading is that you're in contact with a mind other than yours, a mind that's really thought about that subject. It's probably much wiser than you, much more knowledgeable, and that contact through 200 or 300 or 400 pages is just invaluable, and I think is the real beginning of helping children think and have their own ideas. And I think if we want to support that kind of independent learning, whether through that kind of individual deep learning I've just talked about, or a more collaborative, team-based learning, we need to look at how our structures and physical spaces may need to adjust. And I look forward enormously to hearing what Erica will tell us about that. The third point I want to make today is about whether or not we should be encouraging girls to, as they say, have it all. A great career, a fulfilling relationship with a partner and happy children. And as an aside, I would point out that no one ever debates the question of whether men should be encouraged to have it all. But I do, I really, 2.5 years ago at the GSA conference, I heard the GSA president say that girls shouldn't be encouraged to have it all and they have to make choices. And I so disagree with that. I think just as we encourage our girls to be very ambitious about which universities they go to, we also have to encourage them to be ambitious in their relationships. A generation ago, feminists introduced the idea that the personal is the political, and that's perhaps something our girls are going to need to relearn before they negotiate relationships in later life. And if you think about a working life of 50 years or 60 years, the period when your children are small is really a very small section of that life. And I was intrigued, I'm sure many of you noticed Facebook's Chief Operating Officer, Sheryl Sandberg's comment in a speech last year, the most important career choice you'll make is who you marry. Is this what we should be making space for our girls to learn? And is it not so much a glass ceiling that affects girls' progress, but what one of my colleagues called a nappy wall, if you choose to have a child as well as a career, and that if you want children and a career, a partner who shares the load at home really matters. I'm not sure about that. For me, it's not, finding the right partner is not so much about who changes the nappies or who does the hoovering or the Sainsbury's shop. It's much more about whether your partner cares as much about you succeeding in your career as he does about his own. In fact, is he going to make space for your career in the relationship? And is he going to be a cheerleader for you through your triumphs and your setbacks? And of course, and one of the very funny things, I had to spend quite a lot of time yesterday on the phone to various members of the press, and of course they're very obsessed with this, and they kept saying, so is it true, Miss Fraser, that your schools teach girls how to find the right husband? And I kept saying, no, actually, that's not in our curriculum. It isn't, but someone I was talking to when we were all out there, one of our chairs of governors, said, yes, but what our schools do teach girls to do is to make wise choices. And I thought, yes, that's the answer. That's what I should have said yesterday when I was talking to the press. And I think girls, women have come a long, long way in 140 years. But I don't think we're remotely finished. And I think you only have to look, I had the privilege of working for 13 years for the first and, still surviving chief executive of a FTSE 100 company who was a woman. There are still very few. I think you can count them on the fingers of one hand, up there with her. And I think one of the things we need to be doing is teaching our girls to push back the walls of inequality even further, and to continue to make the world a fairer place for women. So how do we make space for extra learning? I talked a bit about the exam-driven culture that we live in. We can't avoid it. League tables exist. People count our A stars and our A's. And I mentioned ASs. I think if you look at something like GCSEs, it really is hard to defend assembling GCSEs in quantity. I don't think there's any evidence that universities count 12 or 13 GCSEs as any better than 9 or 10. And I would love to see in our schools fewer exams. We are an incredibly exam-driven culture, with exams every year from year 10 to 13 public exams. But actually making that space in the year 10 and 11 syllabus for things which aren't examined. You don't have to do an exam for a subject to be worthwhile. And that's why it's lovely to see things like Blackheath High's Matrix of Knowledge course, or Oxford High's Complementary Studies programme, or the weekly ethics lessons at Notting Hill and Ealing High's for year 11 girls. So I'd just love us to continue to consider quality as against quantity when we come up against those exam years. And of course, one of the joys of being an independent school is being able to independently assess whether an initiative suits the needs of our learners and independently choosing whether or not to adopt it. I'm not comfortable with the mindset that says everything that our girls learn has to end in an exam, or rather, if you don't have a qualification in your subject, then your learning doesn't count. Because I feel that approach devalues the value of learning as an end in itself. So we're going to have lots to think about today. I hope you enjoyed the conference, and I look forward to hearing more from all of you throughout the day. Thank you.